there's no single way to convey the scale of the universe. No matter how we frame our explanation, there's not just one way to do this, just like there's no single way to position a message in writing and communication and language. So what matters is choosing the frame that's most impactful for our message and, of course, for our global audience. So framing is how we strategically lead our audiences towards an intended outcome. We're tailoring content for a more persuasive result, and this is something that occurs in the minds of public relations, marketing writers, but any business writer nowadays who's framing messages every day in order to engage the public. So when we're framing messages, we're thinking about what to say about a topic and what not to say in order to communicate that information. And the frame in framing theory is essentially how something is presented to the audience. This is called the frame. And, this is based on research by cognitive psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. And what they were thinking about was how is decision-making influenced by certain phrasing, by how audience members are given the chance to respond to a choice, but that choice is framed in certain ways. So there might be multiple interpretations based on how linguistically that choice is presented. So framing optimizes information processing on the one hand, but also decision making on the other, right? So how participants will process the information and then how they will use that information to make a choice. So for example, hand sanitizer is a hot commodity nowadays. So let's say that there were two hand sanitizer bottles on the shelf and one said, this brand kills 92% of germs, right? Eliminates 92% of germs. And the other brand said, this hand sanitizer allows 8% of germs to survive. Which one would you purchase, the first or the second?
Probably
Professor Bullock?
I would go with the first, I think, right? Because I think most people tend to go with what is positive, right?
Yes. So people tend to go exactly when positive features of an option are highlighted instead of negative ones, people are more likely to support that option. For example, if it's an economic policy, people are more likely to support that policy if the employment rates are highlighted versus the unemployment rates. So the framing effect is essentially thinking about how information is presented. And so when we're talking about this with students, we're thinking about how combinations of words, phrases, and context can rationalize a topic and the value of that topic within a particular point of view. We see this every day with different our news networks, presenting the same information but through various frames. And a lot of this is rooted in sociology as well as cognitive psychology and linguistics. And we want, our students to tap into message framing as a persuasive method to motivate these audiences and also to communicate cross-culturally. And Professor Bullock?
Sure. So another way to think about this is the content is just as important as the delivery. So the content being what to say about a topic, right? We have to constantly be thinking about that. But also many people need to also be thinking about how we're framing it in terms of delivery capacity. So the way that we organize this content for impact. So how impactful we can be through which the frame of reference that we are sharing this information. And again, many of the articles that come from WSJ are framed in such a way, and it goes into some activities which we'll show in a moment, where we can actually have students flip that, right? And maybe see something from a different perspective. But this brings us to these 6 framing principles, which are active in many written pieces, spoken pieces as well. One of the first ones tends to be novelty, right? So novelty, something that's new, something that's unique. Many times this comes from key authority figures, people who have a perceptual influence in something, celebrities. So what we do is maybe we have students look at a particular article, a piece of content from WSJ and really highlight, okay, do you notice any novelty aspects here? Besides the quotes, right? Are there key figures mentioned? Does it happen at the beginning or at the end? We also have to be mindful of something we'll talk about is high context cultures and low context cultures, because that's going to determine where we find the most important information, right? Because people are processing information in different formats in different ways. So novelty would be one framing principle. Another one would also be proximity. Right, so how close or how relatable something is to a community, perhaps maybe even a country, if we're looking at some of the world news, for example. Now, this can also be performed in terms of location as well as ideology. Now, the idea, if there was a wildfire that broke out, and we know that many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, there were wildfires that were pretty prevalent in terms of Australia. We